right off the screen.
It's also okay if you can't get it. I think it looks nice with the website there too.
I was doing a like a group. Oh, never mind. Okay.
Alright. Well, hello everyone. I will let Jenna get us started today.
Today we will be talking about two topics and where they intersect and overlap. The first one is mass shootings. They're defined as incidents in which several people are injured or killed due to a firearm related violence. Specifically, they have to have 4 or more victims. And there have been 85 mass shootings, according to the Gun Violence Archive in 2026. The other topic is murder suicide, also known as homicide suicide, an act where an individual intentionally kills one or more people before killing themselves. Our latest count is 142 murder suicide or attempted murder suicides in 2026 in the US. That number is always changing as more and more happen. And not all mass shootings or incidents of mass violence are murder suicides, but many are. So Sarah, would you like to take it from there?
Yeah, so like Jenna was saying, not all incidents of mass shootings or mass violence are murder suicides, but many are, and so that's kind of part of the purpose of our discussion today with the Murder Suicide Loss Network. And so to get us kind of moving a little bit further, I think we can start with introductions and just sharing a little bit about who each of us are and how we're involved in the Murder Suicide Loss Network. So I'll start with myself and saying that, hi, I'm Sarah Stambaugh. I am a doctoral student in the Counseling Psychology doctoral program at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. My involvement with the Murder Suicide Loss Network is that I am a member of the Scientific Advisory Committee. And before I started working with the Murder Suicide Loss Network, I've had over 8 years of involvement in suicide prevention. I'm also a researcher of suicide stigma and soon to be a researcher in the world of murder suicide. So I consider myself a supporter and an advocate for murder suicide loss survivors, but I am not a murder suicide loss survivor myself. I am a suicide loss survivor. So I'm going to pass it over to AJ and let him introduce himself.
Hi, my name is AJ Schroeder. I'm a supporter, non-survivor community member and advocate for MSLN. I learned about MSLN through my wife, and I've had some exposure to, murder suicide, loss that comes from it. But I'm particularly um, interested in the conversation today and getting into the wider conversation around mass shootings and gun violence as part of that conversation, because I think that's something that has uniquely impacted my generation since Columbine in the late 90s. And I think it's something that is on all of our hearts. We're all afraid. And it's something that can happen anywhere at any time. And it's something that can tie us all to murder suicide loss, and we almost all know of or are aware of a mass shooting that's occurred either in our communities, in our towns, in our states, in our country, and it's a growing concern. So I think it's incredible that everyone got on today to share their perspectives and talk through these really, really important, pressing, and very present issues. And I'll pass that to Latoya.
Thank you so much, Alexander. My name is Latoya, and I am on the board I am on the board of directors for the Murder Suicide Loss Network. I came into this work. I lost my father. He took his own life in a murder suicide. 6 years ago, he murdered his wife, and then moments later, took his own life. So since the tragedy, I have dedicated my life to being a supporter, an advocate. I am currently researching a lot about this subject matter, and it has truly become a big part of my life, helping people who are dealing with the loss of people who have died in such a sad and tragic way. Thank you.
Thanks, Latoya. And I'm Jenna. I'm a murder suicide loss survivor. I lost my mother and brother in late 2022. And I am also on the board of directors for the Murder Suicide Loss Network.
Thank you all so much for introducing yourselves and sharing a little bit about what brought you to the conversation today. To give you a little bit more information about kind of what's inspired this conversation, and why we were hoping to talk about this topic with you all, is that there was this recent 60-minute special that came out talking about mass shooting perpetrators, and why essentially the title of the article and the special was why labeling mass shooters as monsters could hurt efforts to stop them. And there are a number of reasons why I think everyone here today relates to that topic or has opinions and experience. Something that AJ alluded to earlier is that for him and myself, we grew up in a generation where, school shootings became very commonplace. We were both freshmen in high school when Sandy Hook happened. And so we'll be talking about that a little bit today as well. Just to tell you a little bit more about this 60-minute special in case you haven't had the opportunity to watch it, although I'm sure we're happy to link it on our website. Essentially, the article is written by Britt McCandless Farmer, but the interview occurred between Sharon Alfonsi and James Dinsley and Stephanie Peterson from the Violence Prevention Project. Um, Essentially, what the Violence Prevention Project is, as they were talking about in the interview, is that they've interviewed mass shooters and their loved ones during the past 10 years of research that they've been conducting. And what they've really been looking at is trying to understand, like, how do people fall into these pathways where they perpetrate mass shootings, many of which are murder suicides. And so through those interviews, they have learned a lot about how children and adolescents end up perpetrating these crimes, and also how our society's approach to painting them as monsters is not helpful, and is actually part of the problem. Just to tell you a little bit of context in terms of kind of the history of mass shootings, in case you're not familiar, although I think most people have heard of these two incidents. One example of a mass murder suicide that was a school shooting is actually Columbine. And Columbine happened back in 1999, so it's been a bit of time. That did happen during AJ and I's lifetimes, but we were both very young. And unfortunately, more than 20 people were injured. Other people were injured trying to escape. And then eventually, the two perpetrators both died by suicide. And that was Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. Um, this was it wasn't necessarily one of the first mass shooting incidents that happened in the United States, not by a long shot, but it certainly shook the nation in terms of being all over the news. A lot of conversations around how do we stop these crimes? Is it the video games? Is it parenting? Is it the guns? And so I think with that, being said, and knowing that Columbine was such a source of inspiration for a lot of the mass school shootings to follow. I'm curious if anyone like remembers Columbine, what your connections to it are, if you have any thoughts.
Yes, I remember the Columbine tragedy, and it was really sad. I became connected with it after the events. His mother, the young man who orchestrated the tragedy, the gunman, his mother wrote a book, and that's when I really learned more about what happened, his state of mind, the warning signs that were missed. So I do remember it, and it was so sad because a lot of people don't realize that his mother, she went to a support group one day, and the people in the group, they ridiculed her. She talked about this in the book, And they kind of ridiculed her, like, why are you here? Your son is the one who did this. And she just said, listen, I lost someone that I loved that day too. There were no winners here. So I really felt connected to her when I read her book and discovered that a lot of what she has experienced is familiar because my father was the gunman and took 2 lives. So I related to that.
Yeah, I did the math. I was 13 when Columbine happened. So just before high school. I do not remember feeling like it was going to happen in my high school. But I do remember people talking about it. And it was kids. It was kids being kids, which is not always nice. Yeah, I remember.
I think for myself, I was 2 years old when Columbine happened, so I obviously don't have memories of it happening, but I just remember a lot of conversations about Columbine happening. Even I think it wasn't entirely uncommon at my age, when I was a teenager, that like some groups of teenagers kind of like, I don't want to say worshipped the gunmen, but there was some sort of like romanticization of them, and like the violence they um engaged in. I saw you nodding your head, AJ. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I mean, especially among a certain segment of young men, there really was a glorification, a morbid interest, some might say too close of a connection and fantasization of these events. People really, they almost treated it like a game. And as these events kind of kept spiraling throughout our childhood and kept becoming more and more um, publicized and intensified and covered on the news. I mean, all throughout our childhood, we were just told to look out. It's almost like the dehumanization around like Dungeons and Dragons, except it's a school shooting and mass shootings, and that was carried over into our culture. I mean, there's even there were warnings for a specific Call of Duty mission because kids were playing Call of Duty, and there's a mass shooting at an airport, and just all the way back to people downloading the Doom maps that the guys designed from the 90s that show Columbine High School. Um, just all sorts of everything being available on the internet and not enough context and people being very, very young. And like Jenna said, people being kids. I mean, most people that engage with this content for the first time are quite young. And you're either engaging with it on the internet or you're engaging with it, in your school systems as a direct result in the aftermath. And that's kind of just why I'm nodding my head. And it's something that I saw all the way growing up and all the way still in some online communities today.
Anything relating to that, like as time continues on, just some more context before we talk more specifically about the 60-minute special. Was that another notable mass shooting, or specifically a mass shooting that occurred in a school that was a murder suicide, was Sandy Hook. And Sandy Hook took place in 2012. It was December 14th. That was in Newtown, Connecticut. Um, it was perpetrated by 20, this mass violence event was perpetrated by 22 or 20-year-old Adam Lanza. He shot and killed 26 people. And most of those victims were children, especially young children, as well as school staff, and including his own mother, actually. She was the first victim of the series of murders that took place that day. When the first responders arrived, that was when Lanza turned the gun on himself and killed himself as well. And so I do remember a little bit of like when Sandy Hook happened, because I think I mentioned earlier that AJ and I were both freshmen in high school. But I'm curious if anyone else remembers Sandy Hook.
Yeah, I do. I was working in a laboratory at the time with a graduate of Sandy Hook high school. So while I have a vivid reason to remember that day, just in that my coworker was devastated, and needed to go home. And it was like, yeah, you know, yeah, I do remember that day.
Yeah, I think it's knowing that you had like you saw someone with such a personal connection to Sandy Hook. I can imagine that was really heavy, and it makes sense why you remember it. I I don't remember the exact day necessarily, but I remember seeing the headlines and just being really horrified and feeling like I remember that being the point that I felt like when it comes to gun violence. I think no matter what you like, what side of gun use you stand on. Like I grew up in gun culture and like a pro Second Amendment household. I know AJ did too. We can talk about that a little bit later. Um, but I remember that being the point, even as a high schooler, thinking like, how do we cross this line where elementary school students are being killed and we aren't gonna, like, we thought sure, like, I remember thinking as a high schooler, like, surely we're gonna do something about this now. Like, things are gonna change. These headlines aren't gonna be happening anymore. Um, and that's not actually what I remember happening. What I remember is like security procedures changing at school, but like nothing actually changing in terms of legislature or like I just remember a lot of conversations about like thoughts and prayers, and that this was horrible that it happened. Um, I don't know if others have similar memories.
Yeah, to kind of piggyback off what you're saying, I mean, I think that's when I first had a conscious awareness that gun violence was occurring and was a direct and real threat. That's the first time that we ended up having, metal detectors. We ended up having to have an ID showing at all times while we're at school, or they'd kick you out. All of the doors got locked. All of our senior privileges got revoked. And this was like right before winter break. So over winter break, it's like our world changed completely. Lunchroom was locked down. SRO was posted, patrolled the halls during the day, which didn't happen before. So we now had armed presence. And like Sarah said, I mean, there was talks about arming more people, adding more guns to the situation, not not less. It's almost security theater so that they can continue to say it wasn't the gun's fault. It's not having access to firearms. We can prevent this through common sense security measures, which we all know isn't true because this keeps happening. And this is me looking back at almost 28 years old, almost 20 years ago, and they've still done nothing. It's absolutely intense to think back at all of the effort that went into it just to convince us we were safe, not to make us safer, not to have a common sense discussion with us about gun violence, about mental health, about how to prevent things like this from occurring, but how do we put physical systems and barriers in place to control us and prevent this from happening?
Or I don't even, I think maybe like a piece too in there is like maybe not control us, but like get kids that need help. Like how do you intervene when that happens? Um, which thankfully, in the 60-minute special, there are some recommendations, so not all hope is lost. But yeah, I think it does like something that stuck out about what you were saying, AJ, is like it maybe feels like kind of hopeless looking at this in retrospect because it did feel like things were going to change. Um, Something else I want to note too, specifically about Sandy Hook, is that when Jenna and I have done research into Sandy Hook and just like different organizations that have come out of Sandy Hook and a lot of the great work that's been done, going back to the topic of the perpetrators and how they're talked about. Adam Lanza, he did commit this act of mass violence, but he didn't also kill himself. And it's been, I think, interesting to see where some articles will talk about him as one of the victims and others don't, which I think is like the core of our conversation here today too. Of you know, just because someone does one of these mass acts of violence doesn't mean that they aren't also a victim of the mental health care system, access to guns, different systemic problems. All right. Well, we can keep moving. So one quote that really stuck out from the 60-minute special was Densley talking about how there are desperate circumstances that these young perpetrators face. And so he says, quote, "These young people are not criminal masterminds. These are crimes rooted in despair. The only solution they can see is to pull the trigger."
Mhm.
I'm curious if anyone has kind of like reactions to that, thinking about, suicidal crisis, and suicidal violence, or violence as like a pathway to self-destruction.
Yeah, I like to believe that it was a spare of the moment reaction, an impulse, an impulsivity. I don't know. I mean, I can't be in the person's mind, but I can speak from my tragedy, from my side of all of this. And my father was 67 years old at the time of the tragedy. His wife was 66. And so, having lived as long as he lived and experienced the things that he experienced, and having levels of success that he achieved in life, to have something of this magnitude happen, I don't believe that it was something that he planned for a long time. I would like to believe and hope that it was just an impulse reaction to a life of pain.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah, but my research led me to understand that this is where the murder suicide and the mass shootings tend, I think, to differ.
Mhm.
Is that, for Latoya and for me, um, and other survivors of murder suicide loss, we're typically talking about someone in an acute crisis, um, you know, with mental health um things going on. Nothing, there's no, every story is different, but there's some sort of acute mental health crisis going on. Um, and typically, I think, and someone doesn't see a way out and thinks, I'm going to take this person with me for whatever their reasons are, um, versus a mass shooting tragedy, where there's maybe a little bit more planning potentially going into it. Again, I'm talking in my general understanding, um, that's where the two are different.
Yeah, I think from what I read, it depends on the situation. Like I know Columbine, the way they talked about it in retrospect is that this would have been a suicide if it weren't for one of the perpetrators kind of planning and having maybe some ulterior motives, or not ulterior motives, but like more elaborate motives. Um, but from what I was seeing in the 60-minute special, is that they also kind of see it as like an example of like violent suicidality. Um, I think what they were saying is that almost all of the mass shootings were planned. So I think one key difference could be like the state of someone's mind. Like I know something we've talked about before is like if someone's experiencing like Jenna, you maybe should be better to speak about this, but like the delusion that they are saving someone, um, could see that being a little bit different. But from what they were saying in this special is that like these people all were deemed suicidal. They all would have, had they not been suicidal, they wouldn't have done this. Um, which I think is one place they overlap.
To pick at that a little bit, do you think that some of these mass shootings, the killer is potentially delusional and thinks that they're helping by taking out these people? Because often it's people who've been marginalized or bullied or just at the end of their rope. They're completely desperate and they're looking for an outlet. Do you think that it becomes more personal, whereas it might be perceived as more impersonal from the outside looking in?
It's a good question. I don't
It
know
is
the answer.
No, I think that is a good question. Again, from my research, the mass shootings happen typically, but not always, you know, to a more generalized group, i.e., like, you know, often in our murder suicide loss community, we're talking about family, intimate partners, people that knew each other, not always. But I don't know. I don't. I know that there are mass shootings that have happened in this year, where they, you know, were families. You know, there's one in particular I'm thinking of that happened in Rhode Island, where someone went into a skating arena with the intention of killing their family, but others were injured as well. And yet that is a mass shooting, you know, and then the person who did that then killed themselves. So it's I don't know. It's a good question because I don't know how we would know other than that, you know, through either if they had told someone what their plans were or they left behind writings. But even then, some of our murder suicide lost survivors have that. And who, you know, I think that it's a question of like, was this delusional or was this, you know, not? And it's hard to know.
I think one area where maybe this overlaps too is something I know, like AJ, you and I were going to bring up, but like a different type of kind of school shootings that started happening when we were in high school, with like the perpetration, or I'm sorry, not perpetration, but the prevalence of like kill lists or hate lists, um, which essentially were mass shooting events in which like specific names were written out. So here are the very specific people that I am targeting, but like if others end up being a victim, then that's just going to be part of the process. Um, and some of the risk factors that were outlined in the 60-minute special about, like, you know, children who are going to maybe go on to complete those mass shootings, or even this specific type of mass shooting we're talking about where particular people are named. They said the risk factors were early life traumas, abuse, bullying, influences online, and parents negligently allowing access to firearms. Um, I know AJ and I both had kill list incidents happen at our high school, and grew up, you know, in gun culture in the South where most of us have access to firearms. It's very normalized. Like, children are often exposed to like learning how to use a firearm. That's like very normal around here. Um, but yeah, AJ, did you want to talk a little bit about your experiences with?
Yeah, yeah. So I was unfortunate enough to have been named on a kill list. So I can talk a little bit from personal experience, just in retrospect, and how we kind of always knew this was somebody that this could happen with. Um, we all tried to help them fit in. And I'm from so a little bit of background. I'm from a pretty small southern town, class size of about 200, and about 40 classmates of mine and myself ended up on a kill list our junior year, so the first semester of junior year. And the only reason we found out about it is because the person got caught with it. They got arrested, and Tennessee has a right to inform. So all of our parents got called. All of us were pulled aside and informed that there was a credible threat and that this person had been removed from campus premises. And we eventually all found out who it was. I won't share or speculate too much into detail. But I mean, at the time, it was treated kind of as a joke. We knew the kid. Like I said, we grew up with him. It didn't necessarily click in our minds how much danger we all were in, especially given the scope. I mean, 40 plus people on a kill list is a lot out of a small class of a couple hundred. Um, but I think looking back as an adult, I do realize that, so this kid was very heavily bullied. He was into very niche interests. He was a little bit socially inept and awkward. I mean, another incident, he had been caught drawing, we'll say, explicit pictures of another student. Just a history of incidents like this where they start to add up, and you realize this kid's socially isolated. They're from a home where, I mean, I know his dad was abusive. I know that he wasn't getting the attention he needed. I know that his grades were slipping and that he was depressed. Again, this is someone that we grew up with. And just unfortunately, it escalated to a point where, and it had to be his mental health, because he got pulled out quick, and we didn't see him for another year and a half. He eventually came back our senior year, which is a whole different story. Because they didn't ask, they didn't warn us this person was being reintroduced back into the student population. They just kind of showed up one day. And again, there were no further incidents, so I'm fairly certain this kid got the mental health, professional mental health care that they needed, and were put on a little bit better of a path. But it's so easy to end up either a near miss, a victim, someone who is tangentially related to school shootings, because it happens every day in every community, and you will miss the signs. That could just be a weird kid, right? It could just be somebody that will peak a little bit later, will find the right friend group, just isn't in the right geographic area, or it could be somebody who's planning a devastating event that will change their life, and you just don't know. And if you would have asked me prior to this event if that kid was a monster and they were capable of this, I would have said no. I would have said absolutely not. I could see how they would write something like that, or they would express their feelings in a certain way. But for it to get to a point where it was credible, they're pulled out, we're all warned. I mean, it was a major gut check about the seriousness of these situations and how incipient this has become in our culture. And how innocuous it is. Because when you look at it, a mass shooting is something that statistically isn't going to happen to you.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, there you
You're
go.
much more likely to be hurt in a car accident. I think
Exactly.
that's
You're
a
more
good,
likely to be hurt by a vending machine.
right. I think that is a good statistic worth like mentioning in the context of these conversations, is that statistically speaking, like school shootings are actually very rare.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel that way though, because they're so harmful.
And that's a good point. I mean, the psychological impact of it alone, because it is a place that you're told you're safe and you're supposed to be safe.
I remember I used to work as a school administrator for 20 years of my life. I dedicated my life to working with children. And I remember working at a math and science academy here. And my daughter also attended the same school where I worked. And her fifth grade class, there was a young man who wrote a kill list. And every student in the class was on that list, every student's name except for my daughter's. And so once they discovered the list and the letter, and his parents and everyone came in, just out of curiosity, the principal, asked him, "Why did you decide to leave one person off the list?" And he goes, "Because of her mom." And it was, the reason for that was because this young man was very troubled. He was always in trouble. He had a rough life, and people didn't really take the time to give him the care, the attention that he needed. And so, a lot of times when you're working in these school environments, you have children who stand out more so than others, like a sore thumb, and they cause problems, they can wreak havoc, but those are the ones that need the most help. So in his mind, he was doing Miss Bond a favor by not adding my daughter to the list because he knew that that was something that would hurt me, and he didn't want to be hurt because I was that one person in the school that took the time to listen to him, who took the time to hear him out when he was having a bad day and punching the chair and having a temper tantrum. I was the one that would close the door gently and let him, let's talk about this. So, a lot of times, what's missing in these children's lives is a lack of love, a lack of patience. Like you said, Alexander, the person you knew before was from a household where there was abuse. You know, when you go to school, when you're abused at home and you go to school, that's the one place where you have a bit of solace and fun and freedom. And if that's being taken away from you because of your own behavior, and there's no one around that can really look beyond your faults and get to the core of what you need, it could set your mind into a set where, wow, why am I here? What's the point? No one likes me anyway. So I'm saying that to say that those thoughts can start as early as fifth grade. And another thing I want to bring to the forefront too, about 2 years ago, I was at a suicide prevention conference and I posted some pictures being at the conference onto my social media. And that young man reached out to me and told me that he was struggling with suicidal thoughts. So even years later, he's still struggling psychologically behind whatever trauma he experienced in his life that would make him even be that way. So, yep.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Latoya, for your perspective. I didn't know that that was in your background.
Mm-hmm.
My reaction to hearing AJ's story, and I heard at a little preview that this had happened from last week. I have to tell you, my reaction was absolutely fear. I have a small child, and my reaction to hearing that this had been your experience was like, I am so scared that this is going to happen to my daughter. Not, not the violence, but just that this is the culture that she's going to grow up in, where this is a thing. And I'm a little embarrassed by that being my feeling, but that is where I went. And I say that because I have a lot of big feelings that I don't often talk about. Um, but hearing when I hear different things, my reaction is, I think, the same as a lot of people's, to come back to this article where I'm like, um, that person that needs the extra love and attention and help that Latoya was talking about, my reaction is fear. So I do get it.
And I think like fear really makes sense as a reaction because I think even I'll speak for myself. I remember being scared at times. Like I won't talk so much about the kill list at my high school just because I wasn't named in it and it wasn't necessarily super directly related to me. But I saw similar signs in that person, and I think for me actually where like a fear of school-based shootings has been in college when I was an undergrad at UT. It felt like the more and more incidents of school shootings that we were even seeing in colleges, especially with like open carry laws in different states, and like in Tennessee, you can get access to guns at 18, and I'm pretty sure permitless carry is accessible to 18-year-olds now as well. You don't have to be 21. And I definitely remember being afraid, wondering like, when is it our turn? When are we gonna get the alert that, there's been a shooting on campus? I know, AJ talked about the metal detectors a little bit, but also the school shooting drills we've all been through. They're just as regular like regularly incorporated into school is like tornado drills or other natural disaster drills. I was going to talk about this a bit later, but one of the problems that Peterson identified with labeling mass shooting perpetrators as monsters is that we feel like there's nothing we can do. And so we turn around and we say, she says, the best thing we can do is to fortify our schools and train our children to run, hide, and fight. And run, hide, fight is actually what all like school age children and college children or not children, college students are taught in the case of one of these shootings. I'm actually taught that as an instructor as well, that if there were to be an incident on campus, um, you run if you can, you hide if you can't run, and if you get discovered, you should use your body and anything in that room to put yourself between in the path of the gunman, essentially, which is not a good solution. Um, you can't defend against a gunman with a notebook. Um, so I think like the fears that you're feeling, Jenna, it makes sense. Because I think it's also a fear that like students have learned how to live with in a way that I don't know is normal.
Have any of you been in an active lockdown, whether it was a false alarm or anything like that?
Yes, I have.
Do you want to talk about that experience? I was in one in elementary school. There was an armed robbery across the street. Obviously, there wasn't a mass shooting risk, but um, when you're 10, 11 years old and the teacher says this is not a drill, and all of the desks get pushed against the door, all of the blinds are closed, everyone's moved into a supply closet, it becomes very real. And it's not just the drills, it's not just it. It's almost like I would say it's very similar to like the impending threat of a nuclear bomb. Those bomb drills, get under your desk. You just have to do it because one day it might be real. It kind of reaches to the point where you just get this integrated into your society that this is a risk. Um, and it just becomes a part of everyday training like it's a fire drill. We pretend it's okay and it's not. Kids shouldn't kids shouldn't have to react that way, that there is an automatic and immediate risk. And Latoya, do you want to talk about your experience? Was it like a workplace incident or anything like that?
Yeah, it was a workplace lockdown, and unfortunately, I was one of the administrators who was a part of the actual quote unquote crime that was happening. So there was an angry parent in the school who was threatening to do something really bad to a parent. She was upset about her child's grades or what have you. So to protect our students, because we didn't know if she was armed or not, she threatened that she was. So we had to put the school on lockdown. So I was involved from that standpoint. I wasn't actually locked down. I was more so out in the in the quirks of everything, trying to get this lady to go the other way. So, but it was a lot of chaos. The kids did not follow the drill that we taught them. They were just like all over the place and looking out the windows, and they weren't on the floor like we taught them to, and the desks were not where they were. It was a disaster, trust me. So be thankful that it wasn't a real, a really disastrous situation. But yeah, I experienced a lockdown, but not from the standpoint of being fearful. It was more so me trying to get control of the situation to protect the children.
And would you say like previous drills had helped? It's very interesting you have an administrative perspective.
Yeah. Yes, they do. They definitely help, but it's something that you have to do ongoing. It's not a task that you say, okay, we're going to do a drill and we're going to work through this, and then we'll do another one in 6 weeks. It kind of has to go consistently, maybe once every 2 weeks, maybe once a month, but more frequently so that the children can become accustomed to what to do. I know we had a secret password that if there was a stranger in the building, we would make a PA announcement and say, pardon the interruption, please. We need Mr. Kibbles to come to the office. Mr. Kibbles, please report to the office. That was everyone's cue to let them know that there was a stranger in the building, we were in danger, and that we needed to lock our doors and go into lockdown. So we taught the children, you know, that they were never to give that word out, never let anyone know what that means. But when you hear that, you know that there's danger on the horizon.
I remember like related to the idea of drills. I remember when teachers at our school started having to like cover the windows of the doors. You couldn't have doors that had windows that you could see through anymore, like the bulletproof glass installations that happened. Um, I'm smiling a little bit because I think this is kind of a terrible experience to have had, but Latoya, I don't know if you relate to this as an administrator or AJ when you've been a student, but I remember having conversations with other students, like bragging about what our like really smart hiding spot was going to be if there was a shooting at school. So
Yeah.
like the kiln for the pottery, I remember them being like, yeah, that's the smart place to go if something ever happens. Um,
hmm You know, children have such vivid imaginations. You know, I've had children who can tell me, "Oh, if they come here, I'll take care of them. Don't you worry." I'm like, "No, you can't do anything like that." "Yes, I can. I can protect you. I can protect our school." So you get a whole range of emotions when you're dealing with children. They're just so special and so sweet, but they're very vulnerable. We have to take a stand to protect them. And I think nowadays, with me, like I started working at a school called Rosa Parks Middle School in Detroit. I started working there in 1992. So the way the world has evolved, it's much different from the way things are now. So I think children realize today the seriousness of tragedies that can occur with a mass shooting. When I was working back in 1992, we didn't think along those lines. We didn't really have to worry about that. We didn't even have a safety plan in place, a lockdown drill. We only had fire drills back in 1992. We didn't have the things in place that we have now. So the world has really evolved, and I think it's a much safer place now. There used to be a time when you can walk into a school and sign a kid out, and we didn't even ask for your ID. We took your word. If you're his aunt, okay, sure, you can take him home. But now you have to be on the list. You have to show your ID. So a lot of changes have progressed over the years, which are very necessary nowadays.
I feel
Do you
like
think
that's
the internet's made that problem more pervasive?
Yes. Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely. Definitely. A lot of crimes are perpetrated via the internet, and the biggest problem we why the biggest reason that we have the problems that we have with internet bullying and cyber stalking is because parents are too free to allow children to have access to cell phones. Why would a third grader need a cell phone with full access to the internet? That doesn't make sense. And you can eliminate screen time, but you don't know what that child has seen before screen time is cut off. So we have to really monitor what our kids are watching, what they're witnessing, what they're viewing. I was watching the news the other day where there was an adult man who went into an elementary school. He knew the boy's name, he knew the boy's little sister's name, and this stranger was there to pick up two children that they don't even know who he was. The mom saw the video of this stranger going into the school asking to sign out a boy and a girl. He knew their names. And the mom goes, I don't even know who this man is. And of course, the school administration, they stopped him. No, you can't take them home. But as it turns out, I think he was a fourth grader. He had been chatting with this person online. He thought he was a friend. They would play a video game together. He thought that the man was a little boy his age, but really it turned out to be a man who was grooming him so that he could eventually abduct and take the two children away from their family. So we have to be very careful about what we allow our children to have access to. That's the bottom line. You have to stop that. Stop buying children cell phones with full access to the internet because children are curious. I remember when I was a young girl, I would, look on HBO was like a big thing back then. You're not supposed to watch HBO because at night people do things on HBO. Well, I remember staying up late at night because I want to see what they're going to do on HBO. Children are curious, so you have to be careful. And as adults, we have a responsibility to protect their innocence, to protect them from the world. They don't have the survival skills that we all have here on this panel. They don't know how to detect when someone is grooming them or preparing them so that they can be kidnapped and taken away from their families. They just think they're talking on the phone to a friend. They don't have the wisdom and knowledge. So I've already told my daughter, when you start having children, my grandkids will not have a cell phone with full access to the internet. No, we have to stop it.
Well, if no one, does anyone have anything else they want to add to the piece about kind of this history of school shootings? And I think it was helpful to hear, especially how Latoya, like your perspective as an educator and also a mom, how you've seen this evolution over time.
Mhm.
Um, but does anyone have anything else they want to add to that piece before we keep talking about the 60-minute special?
I think in closing, just mentioning children having access to the internet, I think it is a double-edged sword. I think, Latoya, there is a duty to protect by adults, but there's also a duty to respect that curiosity. And a lot of kids learn things from the internet nowadays. I mean, I learned everything from the library. I was very old school. I went in, if I had a question, I checked out a book, even though I had access to the internet. But I mean, kids are finding out all sorts of useful information on how to protect themselves, on how to be journalists, on how to be activists for causes they like through interacting with the internet, through having unbridled access. So I think there is just that double-edged sword of what is appropriate, what's okay, and that's part of that broader conversation as well. Before we move on,
Yeah, I could feel you trying to go down that rabbit hole, AJ, and I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that because I feel like that's a whole other topic. But yeah, I think too, like, it's hard because like kids I'll use this to bring us back to the 60-minute special, but like I think kids these days also they have such a lack of third spaces or like free spaces that they can go hang out. Like I think about mall culture, like now around here if kids want to go to the mall, you have to have someone 21 or older with you. Like you have to have a guardian and you do have to show ID. They wouldn't let me. That change happened like close to 10 years ago now, but they wouldn't even let me take my younger sister to the mall because I was 20 and I wasn't 21 and she was underage. Um, but I think that's led kids to go to the internet for things that they historically shouldn't be going to the internet for to such a degree, or like kids are being bullied and so they only have friends online, which I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that. It's just that if they do end up in a bad space where they're being influenced to maybe even, engage in mass violence, then they could be really vulnerable to those influences, which is something that they talked about in the 60-minute special. They talked about kids feeling celebrated online when they're alone and suicidal, that when they start talking about completing a mass shooting, that, they may be hyped up by these kind of predatory adults who have like really dark intentions and want to see that violence happen. Um, we've also seen now, on a slightly different note, one of the mass shootings that happened more recently. The parents are now potentially going to be held liable for that mass shooting because they gave their child access to a gun, and they ignored all of his pleas for help, even though he was saying, like, I'm afraid I'm going to hurt people. Um, but on that topic, in talking about why labeling mass shooters as monsters is like problem, I'm just gonna quote Peterson here because I think she does a really good job explaining this. But she says, quote, "The other problem is you don't see the people in your life that could be going down this pathway. Because the kid sitting next to you in class is not a monster. He's the kid next to you in class, but he could be thinking about this. He could be sucked into spaces online that are celebrating this. He could be lost. He could be alone and suicidal. But because you can't imagine him as a monster, there's no reason to intervene, report, or seek help. And so part of our messaging is that we like to have to start recognizing people who do this are people, and they could be somebody in your life. Um, that being said, I was curious, Jenna and Latoya, if you wanted to talk about your perspective as murder suicide loss survivors and how, like, for both of you, the perpetrators in your losses are your loved ones and they're not monsters.
Yes, thank you for that, Sarah. As you all know, my father was the perpetrator. He took his own life in a murder suicide. He murdered his wife and then moments later went into his bedroom and he sat on his bed and he took his own life. My father and his wife had only been married the couple had been married for 9 months. And they went to high school together. They had crushes on each other in high school. My dad was a basketball player, his wife was a cheerleader, and they graduated high school and they went their separate ways for many, many years. They married other people, and then fate would bring them back together at an alumni event. And they started dating, rekindled their friendship, and they eventually got married like 2 years after the alumni event where they reunited. And 9 months after the wedding, this tragedy happened. My father was an amazing guy. In spite of what he did, I can't say that he was a monster. I knew him. I was 40 in 2020. I was 45 years old when my father died. So for 45 years, I knew him. I, I've never referred to him as a monster. He's just the opposite of a monster. It's just maybe there was a monster that took over his psyche that day. But I don't believe my father was a monster, and I don't view him to be a monster. He did something very horrible. He took away a beautiful person who had a family that loved her. She did not deserve what happened to her. And I hate that he did that. I hate that. I wish that there was some way that I could go back and erase what he did, because it left a scar on everyone's life that was closely connected to my father and to his wife and to her family. But can I sit before you today and say my father was a monster for what he did? I can't say that about him. I can't. I can never fix my mouth to say that about him, because my father was a wonderful guy. He struggled in life. He was a very successful man. He was the first child to go to college in his family. He was a star basketball player in college. He went on later to become an award-winning coach for young children who didn't have fathers. He was a great person, but behind all of those accolades, there was a man who was hampered by pain and insecurities and closet alcoholism. And I don't know what caused all of that. And he decided to take away a person's life who had everything to live for. She had grandkids that loved her. She had neighbors who adored her ability to plant flowers and keep a beautiful garden. She was a beautiful person, and she did not deserve what he did to her. And I'm quite sure her family views him as a monster because of what he did. And he earned that. He earned that badge of dishonor because of what he did. But the people who love him, like me, my sister, my dad's big brother, who's now become a photographer because of the impact that my father left on him, none of us view him as a monster because we knew him in and out. So I don't think they should be labeled a monster. And what I will say too is, after going through an experience like this, when I do hear of other tragedies that are similar to my dad's, I hold back my judgments and my criticisms, because I've walked in that place. I have stood on stage in front of 2 and 300 people at one time and spoke highly about a man who killed his wife and shot her in the back and left her at the bottom of a stairwell where she took her last breath. I've stood in front of audiences of 2 and 300 people speaking about my father and what an amazing guy he was, not excusing what he did, not justifying what he did, but just speaking from the perspective of somebody who knew him for 45 years. It's just terrible. It's very how can I, and then I've beaten myself up about that. How can you stand on a stage and say so many wonderful things about that man when he took someone's life? How can you write books about a man who would do such a horrible thing? But what I have to remind myself is that I'm not responsible for what he did. My responsibility is to help people see the warning signs, to help people understand that you can have it all. You can be successful. You can work for a major television news network, WXYZ Channel 7 News. My father worked for 30 years, and his last news story was about him. He was on the opposite side of that camera. It can happen to anyone. And if I had known that his pain and whatever he was going through, I wish I had paid more attention to the inner warnings, the little subtle hints that he would give. But I would never label him a monster, and I'm sorry. I can't.
I want to drive us home because I know we're just about hitting our hour. But I think you know, for in my story, my brother was not a monster, but my brother was severely mentally ill. My brother was not getting the support that he needed um, from the people who knew what was going on. I'm talking his family. He didn't have any friends. Um, I don't know his relationships really with his his mental health providers. Um, my understanding is they sort of knew, but um, so I don't think that calling anybody a monster, especially someone who is abused, traumatized, isolated, suicidal, all of these things my brother was, and I assume most of the people that we're talking about today were. So to kind of get us into this, suicide prevention, murder suicide prevention, mass shooting prevention, I think it comes down to mental health and trying to get people what they need and frankly what they deserve, which is to have a very high standard of care and to be supported.
Very well said. And I appreciate both of your perspectives too, as like, you know, the perpetrators in your losses were your loved ones. They were also people that you loved and that you also lost. And I think the minute that we stop looking at people who, both people who kill themselves and people who kill other people in the process of killing themselves through murder suicides or mass shootings, if we stop looking at them as monsters and we see them as humans who are capable of flaws and are capable of violence sometimes, that's, never, like you said it best, Latoya, it's never a justification for it. But if we can empathize and understand how they got to that place, then we can take steps toward preventing it. So, finishing us out with some kind of like what can we do, because Peterson did not leave us without solutions. What they recommend is early trauma treatment and intervention, so screenings in schools, those school based mental health services, suicide prevention. She argues that if you're not suicidal, you're not going to do something like this. And so, if we have mental health support in schools that's free and accessible, that's certainly one way to prevent these events. I know here locally there was a big legislative battle about whether we wanted to keep those services, and we are keeping them, so that is good news. But just that's one implication that we think about, and also these peer-to-peer support services that are coming out, training young people in how to spot the signs and how to have compassion for others that are struggling with their mental health, and instead of saying, ew, that's a weird kid, or like, what's wrong with them? Why are they struggling? Asking, how can I help them? How can I reach out to an adult and let someone know that I'm worried about this person? I think very similar to how AJ has fostered empathy from the person from his school. Um, just learning to be more empathetic and know that anyone can fall victim to this. Anyone can become suicidal, and anyone could potentially be at risk for mass shootings. So, with that being said, I appreciate everyone's time today. I know we would all love to sit here and talk all day if we could. So much more to talk about in the future. Um, with that being said, Jenna, would you like to plug a little bit of information about the Murder Suicide Loss Network?
Sure. We can be found at www.mslnetwork.org. We have uh, we have a fundraiser happening right now. Our group members, we asked them, we polled them, and they told us that it would be very helpful if we can start a sort of foundation, a fund, to help people get mental health services. So please feel free to donate. We appreciate anyone who's supporting us. We also have a new line of merch on our bonfire site. Um, the the older line of merch. Now I get to show it off. Here we go. Oh, no, can't see it because of my background. But anyway, we have sweatshirts and t-shirts and hats and all sorts of fun stuff. Everything that you order kicks us a donation. Yeah, so that's us. We offer support groups once a week, Friday. Every other week is a Friday night, and the opposite week is a Wednesday afternoon. And yeah, we're here. If you need us, if you're a survivor, we are happy to support you.
And if you're a supporter, so survivors, definitely consider taking advantage of the support group since it is free and it's one of a kind in terms of its privacy and it being peer to peer. If you're a supporter and you are not a survivor of murder suicide loss or not a survivor of mass shooting violence, we also would love for you to sign up for our mailing list on our website. We have a link tree with all of our information. But we also have some really cool stickers that we are sending out as thank yous for those who sign up for our mailing list, and also to those who do donate, so that we can have this grant to support our members in getting therapy services that they need. So definitely check it out, and even just a share on Instagram or Facebook helps us a lot. So thank you. All right. I think that's everything. Thank you all for your time today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.